Hey y'all, the temperature has dropped. I'm seeing leaves fall to the ground. I actually put on a sweater the other day. Everything is just saying that it is soup season. Now guys, I am going to show y'all one of my favorite soups from my childhood. My grandmother would make this often, either with beef and vegetables or just sometimes with veggies. Whenever she would do it, I would love it. So I'm going to share with you a version of her recipe today with my own little twist because, I always have to add the fresh herbs and the bone broth and everything else just to make it special. So I am using some beef shank today, and I'm going to take it and cut it into some chunks, about 1 inch or so size chunks. You can also use chuck roast or any sort of meat that you like to stew a little bit, or you could even just use ground beef. That comes out perfectly as well. Now, of course, with the shank, I am going to cut the meat off of the bone, but we are keeping that bone. Okay, that bone has flavor, so we definitely aren't throwing it away. In the comments, I want you guys to tell me what is a soup that is just super nostalgic for you. This recipe makes me think of my grandmother, and I don't think I told you guys, but she passed away this summer, and I just wanted to make something that reminded me of her. So I am going to be chopping up a large onion as well as some celery. Now, some of y'all subscribers have put me on to using the celery leaves. I used to just leave them for my broths, but a couple of y'all have said, girl, why you not throwing that in the food? So guys, put the celery leaves in there. And do you know what? It does actually amp up the flavor. So thank you guys for that tip. I'm also going to cut up 2 carrots, and I have like a Lone Ranger tomato from my garden. I'm going to throw that baby in there and just cut off any of the parts that are bad. But I will also be using some more tomato products. Into a 5-quart Dutch oven, I'm going to put a little bit of olive oil and some butter. Y'all, you know I got to add some butter, baby, because why not? And y'all know I'm in the South. I got to do it, all right? And then I am going to let that warm up and then put in my beef. Now, really, technically, I probably should have done this in 2 batches. But for a soup, I ain't going to do it. All right, I'm just going to put it all in there and just let whatever get brown and go with it. That's good enough for me. I'm going to add a little bit of salt and then just let this beef cook on one side for about 3 minutes and then turn it until the other sides get brown. You know, my grandmother Nanny, she also would frequently mix meat into soups. So she would do beef, or she would also add in chicken as well. Sometimes even like beef, chicken, and pork. So feel free to swap around the meats as you want. She always just mixed and used whatever meat she had on hand and didn't really think much about it, and it always came out great. Right into the juices that have sprung off of that beef, we're going to add all of the vegetables as well as about a tablespoon of minced garlic. This is that fresh minced garlic from my other video where I showed you guys how I just prep all that garlic in advance. So I'm going to add this. I'm going to begin to saute it, and you will see that that juice is going to start drying up. I'm then going to add just a pinch of salt. That's going to help the vegetables just release their moisture and start to brown better. And then I'm going in with a few tablespoons of tomato paste. This is really going to give that broth some body and deepen the flavor. Don't wait until all the liquid is in to add the tomato paste. Go ahead and add it now so that you can brown it and cook off a little bit of the acidity that's in the tomato paste. I'm also going to use 1 can of petite diced tomatoes. It doesn't have to be a petite dice. I'm just using this because it was on sale for 50 cents. Okay, honey. And then I am going to use some oxtail bone broth that I canned last year. Guys, I absolutely love bone broth. It is not only super nutritious, but it adds tons of flavor. And it's so cheap to make at home. In the store, it's literally like $6 for this amount of bone broth, which I just think is ridiculous. So if you can make some, I've showed you how I make mine so many times. But if you want me to do a separate video, just let me know in the comments. I'm also going to add some dried thyme as well as some white pepper, but black pepper is fine. Now, Granny ain't used no sazon tropical, okay? But this is basically just garlic powder, onion powder, a few herbs, nothing too complex. I'm also going to use some Emerald Essence Original seasoning. This is like some garlic powder, pepper, a little paprika, just a general all-around mix that is low sodium. Then I'm going to quickly add in my tomatoes as well as the bone broth because I need to stop that tomato paste from cooking because I do not want it to burn. Now, initially I added 2 cups of the bone broth. However, I'll add a little bit more after I see how much the meat raises the level of the pot. I did put in a bit of beef bouillon because the bone broth that I am using has no salt in it at all, and it just picks up the flavor just a touch. At this point, I realized I needed at least 2 more cups of bone broth, and I also put in just 2 cups of regular water. My grandmother was known as the sugar lady, so she put sugar in everything. I'm going to add about a teaspoon of sugar. It's actually going to balance out the acidity of the soup, but it will not make it super sweet. She probably put in about like a tablespoon though. I also added in some W sauce as well as a bouquet of herbs and some more water because remember, as this cooks, the level will reduce down. The water is not going to make the soup bland because of all the seasonings we have in there, and the bone from the beef shank will flavor the pot as well. I have 2 potatoes. Now, y'all, you can see these potatoes are at the end of their life, but baby, I wasn't about to go buy no new potatoes for the internet. Okay, y'all gonna see these potatoes because they still got some life up in them. Okay, I can't be putting on, I gotta show y'all the real. So I have 2 potatoes. I am going to peel them not only because the skin is rough, but also I find the skin becomes a little bit papery in a soup. So I'm gonna just take that off. And then I am going to cut these into about 1 to 1.5 inch cubes. Now, some of you guys may want more potatoes, maybe 3 or 4. It's just personal preference. I'm actually not a huge potato lover. I just like a little bit to give the soup body and just to have a few chunks here and there. Since I'm not going to be putting this in until about the last 20 to 30 minutes of the cook time, I am going to put them in a bowl and cover them up with water so that they don't turn brown. The soup has been simmering on a low for 1 hour. Periodically, I just stirred the soup to make sure that, nothing was sticking to the bottom. And now I am going to just check the tenderness of the meat. So the meat is a little bit tender, but not quite as tender as I want it to be. So I'm going to cover it up and let it simmer for about 10 more minutes. After 10 more minutes of cooking, I am going to put in some lima beans. Do y'all put lima beans in your beef and vegetable soup? This was something that I always had in this soup growing up. I'm going to add about 3/4 of a cup of frozen lima beans, and then I am going to put in the potatoes as well. Do not add the water from the potatoes, that is not needed. Then I am going to put in some frozen mixed vegetables. Now, technically, you could add these in the last 5 minutes of the cook time. However, I am just going to put them in now. This is a combination of carrots, peas, green beans, and some corn. I'm going to mix this together, and then I'm going to cover this. I'm going to let this simmer for 30 minutes or until the potatoes are tender. You want the potatoes to be fork tender, but definitely not mushy. Potatoes in your soup will just continue to cook for a bit after you even turn off the eye because of how warm it is. So you definitely don't want your potatoes to overcook. Y'all, my favorite part is that marrow. See how that marrow just pops out? So that you get every last bit of your meat, go in and find the beef shank bones and then pull off the meat from them bones. Okay, actually that meat on the bone is real tasty. So y'all fish out the bones, get the meat, and do what you need to do. You can adjust the seasoning from here, but mine was perfectly seasoned. I love to serve this soup on the side with some crackers or some toasted baguette. That is just perfect. Let me know if you are going to make this recipe, and when you do, come back and tell me how much you love it, because this is a fall fave for sure. I will see you next time on Kamira's Kitchen. Goodbye and God bless.